Hello, moms. We are excited to be here together to share with you today. I have Whitney Dauer with us, which normally Whitney is on the other side of the camera. She does all of our recordings for our YouTube channel, and it is so amazing. But she actually is really gifted on this side of the camera too. So I'm excited for you to share. We're going to be talking about substance missions, and substance is really starting to launch into just a new level of mission trips, as you're very well aware of. But Whitney was on the very first Monterrey missions trip, and so we're going to talk about that. But before we do, Whitney, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm actually a missionary kid, like you mentioned. I grew up in South America in a country called Ecuador. It's kind of cool. I was actually born in a hospital that my dad built in Quito, and that's the whole reason they went to Ecuador. And then full circle, I was actually born in one of the hospital rooms that he built. And then my mom was a teacher at there's a missionary boarding school in Ecuador that's quite large. And so my mom was a teacher at the boarding school, and I attended boarding school at a missionary boarding school where my mom taught. So my whole life was kind of surrounded by missions work growing up.
Wow. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it hard? Was it great?
Yes. All of the above.
Yeah.
There were really wonderful things, and there were really beautiful things, and there were really hard things, and lots of choices that were made on my part that weren't the greatest. And so, it probably could have been better, but God really made it beautiful in and through all of the ways that, choices are made, but God glorified them, and here we are today. So I came back, and praise God for that.
Yeah. So when did you come here? When did you come to the States?
I moved to Texas when I was 18. I moved to Texas when I was 18 to go to college and made really poor life choices. And then I ended up in Minnesota living with my sister. So my sister lives in the Twin Cities, and that's how I wound up here and met my husband. And so now this is my 16th winter, and they get easier. Who knew? I did not like them in the beginning. Andy proposed right away before I knew what I was getting myself into. So
and you're counting them. 16th winter.
I know.
And tell us about your kids.
Okay, yeah. So I'm a homeschooling mom. I have 4 wonderful kiddos right now. They are 10, 8, 7, and 5. They go to the Substance Homeschool Co-op, and we love it.
Which you help run, by the way.
Yes.
Like Whitney is here all the time. All the time. And one of those I know is a big part of your mission here at Substance is the Homeschool Co-op, which is pretty incredible. So, well, all these years later, like you talked about being a missionary kid, and you grew up doing missions, your family was doing missions, but now all these years later, you are the missionary, and you're going out, and you're starting to do missions in other countries.
Yeah.
AKA Monterrey. So you were a part of the first missions trip, right?
Right.
The Substance Monterrey missions trip.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell us about it. How was it?
It was awesome. I don't think I can actually even describe how amazing it was for me. So I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in the Andes Mountains, and so we land, and there's all these beautiful mountains, and immediately it just felt like I came home. And then we get in this car, and the driving reminded me of home, and just the culture, the language, everything, the music, everything reminded me of coming home. And then we drive to the actual Monterey Campus, and it's this really cool 3-story building, and you walk up these stairs onto the roof, all of the team did, and I immediately started sobbing because it's literally exactly built like my childhood apartment building that I grew up in.
No way.
And so you walk up the stairs, and the mountain is behind you, and the city's in front of you, and even the little building where the stairs come out of the building was exactly in the same spot that it was in my hometown. And that was kind of the apartment building where everything went south for me. And it was just this sense of God being like, I'm bringing you back. I'm bringing you through. I'm bringing you home, and now you get to make the right choices. And so I just started sobbing of like, this is your spiritual home. And it was substance at the same time. And so for me, I think it was a lot, I don't know, I wouldn't say more impactful because everybody has their own experience. But for me, it was just, I literally can't get over that feeling of walking on the roof and being like, oh my goodness, like I'm literally home. And so it was just kind of wild. And then that night, I was able to translate. They had a lot of the youth worship team come, and I was able to translate their stories for the rest of the missions trip team. And I was in tears the whole time because these are me. Like I saw myself in these kids. Pardon me if I get emotional because it was just so impactful. Yeah. But I saw myself in these kids, and I saw myself in their stories, and I saw myself in them saying, these are the choices I made, but God found me because I have substance. Or this is the life that I was living, but God found me because I found substance. Or, this is the family that I was part of, but now I have substance family and I have an alternative to what I was living. And I was able to pour into these kids and take them out of maybe a little piece of the darkness that had been in me when I was a kid. And so it was this really redemptive experience of being able to come full circle of in this place that felt like the home where all of my bad choices had started, and being able to shift that for other people and be like, you know what, maybe I can share some of the wisdom that I've gained from the choices that I've made, and they don't have to make that same choice. And that was really, really beautiful for me. And then on top of that, there was some past hurts in my life. I don't need to get into it. We can go through it. I have a lot of trauma. So if you ever want to share trauma stories, I'm here. I'm healed. I've gone through lots of therapy, but there are a lot of things that spiritually, not just therapy. So I've done the therapy, but spiritually, a couple really big moments where God unlocked a trauma, and it wasn't that there was healing, it's that there was spiritual wholeness on the other side of it. And so God was saying, yep, that was then, but this is now, and I'm bringing you to this exact same experience because I want you to walk in freedom. And so for me personally, I went to be a missionary, and there was some of that. There was some ministry, but so much of it was me being ministered to by God and Him showing me who I am in Him and who I get to be now despite the past choices that I had made. So it was really beautiful for me personally, and being able to walk through that. And I don't think I'll ever stop being in awe of everything that I got to experience when I was there.
Yeah, it makes me think of parenting a little bit, and how we go into parenting and we're like, okay, I'm going to help our children, and we're going to raise our children, and we're going to do all this, and I have this big responsibility. But in the end, especially as our kids grow older, we start realizing, oh my goodness, parenting is shaping me.
Right.
Like, I came to this to give. I thought this was what I was supposed to do, which it is. But God does this redemptive work in our own lives through parenting. And as a person who's done missions also, I found that the same experience with missions too, where you go to serve, but God just does a work in us as well. And it's beautiful when it both can happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And even our first night there, so I don't sleep well, and so I had slept maybe 30 minutes before we had to go to the airport.
What?
So I was exhausted. We get to the airport, or to the hotel, sorry, and I laid down and I was so exhausted. I was like, okay, I get to sleep. And I slept for maybe 10 minutes. God gave me this dream of the city and this whole vision for the city of Monterrey. And so here's me exhausted, but on fire, writing down all of these visions and dreams and all of these things that He's speaking to me. And so even before I went onto the roof of that building, my heart was planted there, and I was ready to go, just on fire for these people and for this city. And it was just really cool and I was rested spiritual, because I was not rested physically. But it's just really cool how all of that came together into this really beautiful experience.
It's obvious that God had a plan, and He was unveiling it to you little by little.
For sure.
As you're on that trip.
For sure.
What are some of the things that you guys did there? Can you share some details?
So it was kind of a planning trip. So we weren't exactly sure what we were going to do, but COVID for Mexico was a lot harsher for COVID in Minnesota. And so they had been coming out of this really tough COVID season and losing a lot of things. And there was some logistical things that happened with getting the new building. And so everyone was kind of burned out. And so we really wanted to go and really pour into their staff and pour into their youth and pour into their volunteers who have been giving and giving and giving. And we're coming out of, we had 16 weeks of COVID and they had years. And so we really wanted to pour into that. And so we did that. We poured into them. We had a pastors meeting and poured into their pastors, and we did outreach in the city. And so the culture, Latin American culture, is a little bit different than American culture in that nothing is free. And so even people understanding that the gospel is free doesn't happen. Because in Catholicism, which is the predominant religion in Mexico, it's not free. You have all of these things that you have to do in order to be saved. And so for us to say, hey, Jesus wants to come for free, it doesn't even compute. And so we had a whole ministry of Love the City Day where we gave out free bread and free water. And even people they're they won't even look at you because it can't be true. It can't be real. And so then they would see this city and see our red shirts and see the red building, and you could see them kind of their gears turning as they were like, oh my goodness, it's actually free. And the church itself is next to this apartment. No, not apartment. It's like a like a strip mall.
Okay.
And there was a lady who saw us giving out bread, and she said, "Can I have bread?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's free. Can I pray for you? Anything?" So I prayed with her, and it was beautiful. And a couple minutes later, she comes back with one of her friends who works at this strip mall. "Can you pray for her?" I said, "Absolutely. I'd love to pray for her." So gave her bread, gave her coffee, prayed for her, and maybe half an hour later, she comes back with another friend. "Hey, can you pray for her too?"
Oh, my
I said,
word.
"Yep, I'd love to." So I pray for her, all the things, and a couple bit, like, we're about to be done, and she comes back with another lady, like, "Hey, are you still praying?" "Yep, we are still praying. I would love to pray for you." So we prayed for them, and just this, I believe it was a nail salon or a massage parlor, I'm not exactly sure, but all of the women in this place got prayed for on their breaks because we gave out free bread, which was so cool. And then later that day, we did evangelism in the city. So it's a very, very large city. Depending on the numbers that you think about, it's about 5 million people, which is massive. It's almost more people in the city of Monterrey than in the state of Minnesota, which is just insane. So we were going through all of these neighborhoods, and people recognized us. "Oh, you guys were the guys in the red shirts at the church, and now you're in my neighborhood telling me about Jesus, that there's this really cool church service." Dots were connected. So many people came to church the next day because we were doing Love the City, which is what we do here, kind of the same as Serve Day, but in Mexico. And it was just so cool for people to put those dots together and to make those connections and to be able to come to church because they had seen people doing something that was so foreign to them.
It's so incredible. It's so incredible.
Right.
And I'm just thinking about, like, I'm getting motivated. Like, I'm like, take me on the next Monterey trip, which
Right.
there are trips coming up.
Yes.
But I just want to, like, talk about this for a minute, because if any of you are feeling like, oh, like, I would love to be a part of something like that, but I have kids. Well, Whitney, you have kids, and I recognize you didn't. You and your husband went, right? Your
Correct.
kids stayed home.
Correct.
But I mean, that's a lot of work. You don't really have family in the city. Let's talk logistics. Let's talk mom logistics for a minute. How did you navigate that?
So I'll say I have the best friends on the planet, and our friends took our kids for the whole time that we were there.
Wow.
Which,
How many days was that?
not 5 days, 6 days.
Okay,
so
5,
it wasn't
6
a
days.
huge number of days. But
Well-
it's a huge number of days for 4 extra kids.
Right.
So we have the best friends, and they were so gracious, and our kids stayed there, and they're a safe family, which is really big for us. And so, God worked it out for us, basically.
So you didn't have to say, this sounds like an amazing thing to do. I'd love to go on this trip, but I have kids. We just can't. You, like, said, no, I feel like God's calling us to this, and we're going to make a way. And God provided, and you were able to have provision for your kids without family.
Right.
I think that's a thing that is hard for a lot of people. And that just, I mean, I think that just pours into our whole DNA and culture at Substance of, like, this is why we create community. This is why we create, because you have community, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your friends are from Substance, yes?
Yep. All Substance people taking care of our kids the whole time.
So, I mean, this is a great example of, like, we can do the things that God's calling us into without overly stressing because we have community. And
Right.
and that's why our gather groups are important and why we do what we do. So,
Right. I actually met the family that took care of our kids through a gather group, but became closer through a gather group. And so,
amazing.
yeah, and space, the mom was part of my space group at the time. And so
Amazing.
it all worked out really well.
That's amazing. So, okay, so let's move on to talk about, like, your kids, because I know you have a missionary heart. You grew up missions. You're doing missions now. How do you instill that in your kids? Like, what does that look like, connecting with your kids on that topic?
So for me, I feel like it's a little bit easier. I have a million stories, and my kids love to ask
True.
me all the time, tell me a story about when you grew up.
True.
And so
you've got the stories.
I've got so many stories.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I feel like I'm giving them a global lens. So we don't think about, we live in this bubble, or we're not Minnesotans, we're citizens of Earth, right? And so I talk to them about how people live, how people are raised, how we are so much more blessed than other people. And so we need to use the blessings that God has given us in order to help other people. And they do jobs for chores and stuff, so they get dollars. And I'll tell them that a lot of the people in the world live an entire day, month, whatever, on this dollar that you are spending on an ice cream or whatever. And it makes them think about, I want to help those people, and I want to tithe, and I want to offer, and I want to do things that I can do. And so we've actually, as a family, on other times when we couldn't be part of the missions trips, we've looked at our house and been like, okay, we have a lot of excess, and we've sold stuff, and they've taken toys and they've sold toys, and we've donated it towards ministry. And so those are things that we can do when I can't go on the trip, right? Because I didn't always have the family, and I didn't always have the friends that I could leave my kids with. But how can I incorporate that? I can give, somebody else who's single can go on this trip. I can donate towards their costs because it's expensive. It is. Yeah. It's a sacrifice. And so I can take a little bit of that burden off of them, and that's still just as much my piece of heaven as it is theirs.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And just being an example even in that way.
Right.
And involving our children in that way is huge.
Yeah.
Is huge. Well, with our remaining time, what could you encourage our moms with? Maybe if you know any details about anything coming up.
Yeah, so there's a few trips coming up that I wanted to talk about. So there's one in February coming up. It's a construction trip. They're going to be fixing the parking lot and the bathrooms and doing a lot of painting. That one's actually full. But if you're a master builder or something, please reach out to Substance Missions. They could still use you. There is a worship camp coming up in June. So anybody who teaches music or sings or is part of the worship team would be super helpful. And then they're also doing a VBS trip in August, which would be so much fun. I have so many memories of VBS missionaries coming down, and so much fun.
That's
and
cool.
Then there's actually a trip in, let me get the right, Zambia from July 6th through the 20th. And so this is a medical missions trip. However, they do have lots of spots for non-medical people, I did ask. So there's logistical stuff, and that's the one that I'm actually super fired up about. And I don't get to go on just because of the time that it takes, but would love to do that. And yeah, so please reach out to missions@substancechurch.com, and they would love to get you more details and send you stuff to pray about these people, because it's really amazing what's going on.
Yeah, agreed. I'm so excited about the trajectory of missions with Substance, and hopefully this gives you a deeper picture into what our church is doing revolving missions, because we're all called to be missionaries, whether it's going to Monterrey, going to Zambia, or to our own children. And developing a missionary heart and a missionary lens is the heart of God in whatever that looks like in your context. So thanks for joining us, you guys, and we'll see you next time.